All right, historians, for the next several sessions, we are going to review kind of the colonies in America and how they went from a colonial society to an American nation through the American Revolution. We're going to start that query with a mind map challenge. So it's going to be a little bit intellectual. It might be fairly academic, but I want you to do your best. So this is what we're looking at. And you can use my lecture if you like. You can reference my lecture. You can watch the video or you can watch it in person. But this is where we're starting. By 1763, Americans had never been more united. They fought and they celebrated together. But they also recognized that they weren't exactly British citizens. Maybe one of the things that was uniting them was that they weren't totally British and they weren't yet American, right? They considered themselves just something else. Americans across the colonies, in fact, viewed any time there was an imperial reform as a threat to the British liberties that they saw as their birthright. These were people who believed themselves to be British civilians or citizens acting on behalf of the crown by colonizing America. So here's our research question. Basically, the question is, how did we get to revolution? You may have thought that the American Revolution was motivated by like a uniquely American identity or common beliefs shared by the colonists. You might have thought it was formed or it occurred as a result of resistance to the economic forces that resulted from the French and Indian War. But as the reading recognizes, Americans were really caught up in a variety of motivations. They were evaluating the social, economic, and intellectual realities of colonialism, as well as the political realities. So that's what we're looking at today. We're really going to look at sort of all the things that came together that bound the colonies towards revolution. How did these social, economic, and intellectual forces ultimately shape the colonies toward revolution? And you might hear my little one-year-old research assistant in the background. I hope that's okay. So here's your challenge. It looks like a lot, but we're going to break this down, okay? First, you're going to review all relevant reading and lecture materials. You're doing that right now. And using these materials, you will write a definition for each: social, economic, and intellectual. Then you'll identify 3 quotes from the secondary material. You can use a lecture, you can use the American Yop, you can use a documentary, but you need a quote that substantiates your definition. So basically, you're writing a definition, and then you're going into what the historians before you have written to say, and this person agrees with me here, or like this person says, this is how I define it. And then you're going to illustrate that with primary sources. You'll select 3 primary sources, each identifying one of these forces: social, economic, and intellectual. Once you've done all that, you're going to, or maybe as you're doing that, you're going to create a diagram or a mind map that connects these quotes, definitions, and sources. You've got to define these things. You've got to quote American Yop or lecture. You've got to identify a primary source by both in title and brief description. You've got to connect these things together in the summary statement, and you've got to cite it. This might look like a ton of work, and it is, but you can go through it step by step. Here's how. You're going to make a mind map. Some of you are very artistic and abstract and creative, and so you may already do mind mapping already. That may be something you already do with when you're researching or studying. Some of you might be a little bit more linear. You write things like subtitles and bullets. Either of those things is fine. Or you are more than welcome to use this template, which I will be using, and I'm actually going to do part of this in real time with you. So if you want to use this mind map, you have a link to it in Canvas. But we're going to do this, right? We're going to do this for each of these things. Let's look at the social realities leading up to the revolution, the economic realities, and the intellectual realities. How to get an A. So getting an A means you did it perfectly or almost perfectly. That means you did all of it as required. You identified, you defined each of the 3 forces. You included a quote from a secondary source. You included a primary source as an example or an illustration. You summarized. You used appropriate sources. You cite your sources. I can read it, and it's turned in on time. Maybe you're like, not aiming for an A today, but I would take a C. Okay, information is there, but not totally cohesive. Parts might be missing. It's evident that you did the work, but your synthesis is not sophisticated enough. You haven't clarified what it is that I'm looking for. Maybe all your sources are from the course materials, but not cited correctly. And it's still turned in on time. Okay, how to fail. I don't want you to fail. Yikes, don't do it, right? But if you don't do this assignment or you don't turn it in on time, you'll fail. If you plagiarize, you'll fail. If you miss critical information, you won't get a passing grade. And if you use incorrect or unapproved or uncited sources. So let's avoid that, okay? And let's do this right together. Okay, get your mind map going. Using a blank mind map template or a blank piece of paper, let's walk through each step. Now, reminder, you might be like, wait, primary sources, secondary sources, what is all this? A primary source is a first-hand account created at the time in question. I'm talking newspaper articles, diaries, letters, interview recordings, photographs, artwork, or legislation. A secondary source is what I'm doing with you today, a historian, a scholar, telling you what happened during a specific time. This might come in the form of a textbook or an article, a lecture, or a documentary. All right. Okay, enough buildup. Let's do this. Social, economic, and intellectual realities shaping the American Revolution. Okay, social forces. First, you're going to write your definition of social history in your own words. I'm going to give you some information that might help you write that. And then we're going to move on to steps 2 and 3 after that. Okay, social. What am I talking about? Social historians focus on structures and interactions of people, groups, and society rather than affairs of the government. Social history initially focused on disenfranchised people, like women, children, people of color, Native Americans, enslaved people, right? Those kinds of folks were the ones social historians were looking at. But later, historians also looked at the middle and upper classes. As a field, social history includes economic history as well as sociology and ethnology. Now you can take a picture of that. You can pause this and try to paraphrase it, or you can move on to the next slide, which gives you a little bit more information. Social motivations. We're looking at the organization of people into classes or groups. We're looking maybe at relationships within the colonies or different alliances to the British royalty. We might be looking at consumption, purchasing behaviors that represent wealth or status. Maybe shared beliefs that the government is put in place by the people for the people. Rankings based on race, gender, and land ownership. And the roles of women, children, and non-white men. These might be things that we're looking at when we're looking at social history, okay? So pause the recording, write your own definition. What is social history in your own words? And when you're ready, let's come back. Okay, here's my social history. Now you see I have orange arrows showing you what I'm filling out right now. My definition of social history, as you might see here, is focusing on interactions of people with special emphasis on women, children, and the disenfranchised. Okay, done. I've done step 1. Let's go back and see what's left to do. Now I need to find a quote in a secondary source, something written by a historian, that connects to my definition about the colonies and the American Revolution. All right, well, what's this link take me to? Your textbook. So we are looking at colonial society and the American Revolution, aren't we? That's where we were looking at. So let's click on colonial society. Now you've already done this reading because you've already turned in your vocab and you've already researched all this. So there's a lot of this that you already know, but I'm going to take a look here. Let's see. Consumption and trade in the British Atlantic, slavery, anti-slavery, pursuing political, religious, and individual freedom, 7 Years' War, Pontiac's War. I think I'm going to just start with this first section, consumption and trade. All right, let's see here. This is interesting. During the 17th and 18th century, improvements in manufacturing, transportation, and the availability of credit increased opportunities for colonists to purchase consumer goods. Instead of making their own tools, clothes, etc., they increasingly purchased luxury items made by specialized artisans and manufacturers. The average person's ability to spend more money on consumer goods became a sign of their respectability. I wonder if there's anything here about women in particular. Sorry if you hear him in the background. I'm just kind of scrolling to see. So I'm not seeing anything in particular that responds to women, but you know what else I can do? I like this quote quite a bit. During the 17th century, etc., as the incomes of Americans rose and the prices of these commodities fell, shifted from luxuries to common good, I like this one a lot. The average person's ability to spend money on consumer goods became a sign of their respectability. So I'm just going to copy that. I highlight it and I copy it. And I'm going to go back to my template, the one that I'm filling out with you. And I'm going to click here. Now you may not be able to edit in your PDF, but you might be, depending. All right. The average person's, let's pull this out a little. The average person's ability to spend money on consumer goods became a sign of their respectability. Now, I'm not going to fully cite this yet, but I am going to remind myself where I got it. And I would encourage you to do the same. Okay. Sweet. The other thing you could do if you were interested is you could keyword search women, right? That one has to do with Virginians and enslavement. Women could be included in this notion of equality. Women's role in the family was complicated. It was a time of transition. So if I was really interested in looking specifically at women and their roles, maybe this is what I would focus on. But what if I want to know about women in consumption? Divorce rates, what coverture, women, let's see, Native American women. Okay, then we get into primary sources. So I think I'm going to stick with my quote. I like my quote. It says, the average person's ability to spend money on consumer goods became a sign of their respectability. Done. All right, got it. Now, social forces. Find a quote in a secondary source. Done. Now I need to search for a primary source that illustrates the social forces. Okay, so definition is focusing on people with special emphasis on women. I'm focusing on people in particular through this consumption thing, right? People spending money. So now I need something, a primary source that has something to do with like women, interactions of people, and some sort of form of like respectability. Well, I could click on this primary source link right here. And that takes me to the primary source reader. And I was in British North America, or no, Colonial Society. The other thing you could do is scroll when you get to the chapter itself. This is the original secondary source link I took you to. You could just click on primary sources. Eliza Lucas, right here, a woman born to a moderately wealthy family in South Carolina. Throughout her life, she shrewdly managed her money and greatly added to her family's wealth. These two letters offer an unusually intelligent financial manager offer a glimpse into the commercial revolution of social worlds of the 18th century. Okay, this looks interesting. So what if I were to read this, and what I would find is that Eliza, there's something she writes later. Like, you just read it, look through it, see if you think that this fits your definition. Somewhere in here, she writes about a library. I have a little library, well furnished, for my papa has left me for most of his books, in which I spend my part-time. So she talks about that. She's writing a letter. I think this letter, after having read it several times, which I did before I started the recording, I think something about this tells you about, she uses like this term worthy, right? That she's trying to demonstrate that she has access to things. And that demonstrates that she has, right, English taste, for example. Let's see here. What else could she say that I think I'm very fond of? That is not employed by my business. She manages 3 plantations. Now, this is probably a very good economic source as well, but I'm going to say it's a good one for social because it's from the perspective of a woman. That's what I'm going to pick. All right. So here's all I have to do. All I have to do is give the title, Eliza Lucas Letters. So I'm going to copy. And I'm going to paste. And again, I'm not fully citing it here. I'm going to make a separate citation list. You could do your citations right here and if you'd like. But then I'm going to say, I'm not going to copy what the American Yawp says because my professor wants me to write my own thing. So these letters show a woman's perspective on consumption goods and finer things in the colonies. Okay, sure, done. I love it. I would accept this. Now, if this was something you turned in, I would be like, okay, I like it. So we've done that. And now we're going to move on to economic. Now, I'm not going to do the rest of the mind map with you, but I am going to help you define economic and intellectual. So move on to your next section. Economic historians research equality, finance, technology, labor, and business. Economic history emphasizes historicizing the economy itself and analyzing it as a dynamic force, attempting to provide insights into the way it is structured and conceived. These are the things economic historians look at: a distribution of wealth. They might look at slavery and the growth of the slave empire as it connected to colonial demands. They might look at taxes and the financial relationship of the colonizers and the colonized. And they might look at land ownership. Okay, so pause the recording if you like and toggle. Look back. Economic. What is economic history? Write your own definition and then do the same thing you just did with me. Search the American Yop for some quote, something that substantiates your definition, and then find a primary source that illustrates it. All right, when you're ready, let's do intellectual. And same thing. Intellectual historians deal with the articulation of ideas. They closely study written expressions of thought, especially those crafted at a fairly sophisticated or reflective level. They look at revolutionary ideas and ideals, things like all men are created equal, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are ideas, concepts that were promoted throughout the revolution. We're talking about famous writings like the Declaration of Independence, Common Sense, and John and Abigail Adams' letters. They're looking at the thinking and conversations around revolution. So be thinking about this as you're looking for your own definition. What's the difference? Social's looking at organizations or specific people. Economic is looking at money and systems. Intellectual is looking at thought and concepts, right? Reminder, your challenge is to do each of these things. I want you to write a definition for each of these: social, economic, and intellectual. Then I want you to search American Yop for 3 quotes that substantiate your definition. You believe this about economic history, as the American Yop says. Here's an example. And then you illustrate it through a primary source. I can see this in the words of so-and-so. Remember, a primary source is a source that was created at the time in question: photographs, newspaper accounts, diaries, letters, and images. Every primary source you need access to is at the bottom of one of those chapters in American Yop. This is a list of these same primary sources. You can access them through my lecture here, or you can access them through the bottom of the chapter in American Yop. So look at all of these things. These are just, directly taken from American Yop, the title and the link, as well as a brief description. Now you can just click on these and take a look. One of these might be intellectual. One of these might be economic, right? One of these, like I put, was social. It depends on kind of how you're defining each of these things. A secondary source is a historian's interpretation and description of events or historical material, i.e. a lecture, book chapter, or documentary. These are the sources we've considered so far: American Yop, my lectures, the films we've watched. You can use any of those. You can quote any of that. Now, once you have completed your mind map, you've got your 3 definitions, your 3 quotes, and your 3 primary source examples. I want you to review your findings and write a summary statement, considering answering our prompt question as your summary. How did these social, economic, and intellectual forces lead the colonies toward revolution? All right, here's another example. This is when I went with a totally different approach to social. So you can see my examples here. Again, you can toggle, you can use the Google Slides, you can stop in the film, take a look and see what you think. And here are some hints that I mentioned in the Canvas assignment as well. Now, when we get back together, we are going to talk more about how we go from what's on the left to how we go to what's on the right. So how do we go from colonies to revolution? And we're going to start with your mind map. What do you think about how America got here? All right, everybody, I can't wait to read your stuff. See you soon.